Good evening, Heart for the Community Initiative. Good morning, good evening, YouTube. And for everybody who is watching all over the world, I have recently realized that I have an international audience. So for all of you from foreign lands and from all of the 50 states, we say God bless you. Good evening, welcome back. And already my number one fan, my wife, Tisha Armstrong, has already said good evening to us. She is awesome. Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate you. She is my ride or die. If nobody else gonna be down, it's gonna be Tisha Nicole Armstrong, and I appreciate it. So thank you once again for joining us. We're so glad you're back. This is another installment of the Heart for the Community Initiative interview series. I am your host, Carl Armstrong. I serve as Director of Operations for Heart for the Community Initiative. And there is Pastor Gary Holland. He's already saying hello. He is our Director of Community Relations. He is a tremendous man, and he director and the CEO and founder of a whole lot of stuff. So we appreciate his presence too. We are so blessed and so happy to have with us a very important person. He is senior pastor of the St. Mark Missionary Baptist Church in Portsmouth, Virginia, none other than Dr. Dwight Shawrod Riddick. What a tremendous pleasure and honor to have you with us today, sir. God bless you and good evening.
Listen, I'm glad to be here. Thankful for the opportunity. To you and everybody who's really a part of just kind of having these conversations. Want to commend you on that. And again, thanks for letting me be a part tonight.
All right, wonderful. Hey, just a few notes we want to take care of. First of all, call your family, friends, and let them know that Dr. Riddick is on Heart for the Community Initiative. And I want you guys to start a watch party. I want you to share the video. We want this information to get out to as many as possible, as quickly as possible. So you guys go ahead and do that. And while you're doing that, let me make a very quick announcement. This Saturday, the 12th of September, from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Cecil Garrison Park in Dumfries, Virginia, we're going to be having the Early Bird to the Polls event. Oh, man, this is going to be a wonderful event. We're going to have several local and state politicians who will be speaking. The headline will be Qasim Rashid, the Democratic candidate for the 1st Congressional District of Virginia. And he is running against incumbent Republican Rod Whitman. And so he'll be speaking there. We'll also have comedian Petey Ray Red from Portsmouth, Virginia. Yeah, Petey going to be there. He's going to hit the stage at about 2:15 p.m. Okay, we're going to have voter registration, voter education, census information. This is going to be a tremendous event. And listen, we're going to be practicing social distancing. This is an outside event. Masks are mandatory. Please bring your own. But for those who don't have them, we will have masks and gloves on hand. And we're going to have several different voter registration tables. So we don't have everybody ganged up at one place. We're going to have some drinks and very light refreshments. So don't y'all bring them hungry kids out there. I said drinks and very light refreshments. We're going to have a little snack for them. And listen, this is in the Northern Virginia area, but we have listeners and onlookers from all over the country. I know you can't get here on Saturday morning, but you can do something. We want to make sure that everybody gets to the polls and that everybody votes. Don't let 2020 be the year that your vote is not counted. All right. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Riddick, looking at these numbers, it looked like that somebody's already started to share and let their friends know that you're here. So once again, we thank you for coming and welcome to Heart for the Community Initiative. All right. So this is what I want to talk about, sir. We have some hot stuff going on. Of course, two major issues, COVID-19 and also this tremendous atmosphere of racial unrest. I want to know, how is St. Mark dealing with COVID-19, the challenges and the changes that it has brought to your ministry? What are y'all doing down there?
Wow. So first of all, we're located in Portsmouth. And so that maybe kind of gives people context on just where we are. It's not New York inner city, but it's not, cows in North Carolina rural. And one of the challenges I think that we've had to face is the challenge of humanity, and that is change. I think no matter who you are, no matter what sphere you live in, change is always something people have to adapt to. And so for us, it was kind of making a change. I want to say, on the one hand, we were already doing some live streaming. We were already doing some things online. And so that shift wasn't the big shift. I think the big shift was not the going online, it was the not coming on site. And so, like most churches, we are live streaming our services, and we're making ministry available via every virtual platform we can. We were in social media, but we had to kind of repurpose our resources so that we could be really intentional about our social media. We found that there were some areas that we were just negligent in because we hadn't moved forward as fast as we probably should have as it related to what is modern day virtual ministry and technology. Also, I think we have been community active, but this really heightened how much we wanted and needed to be in the community. It created a need in the community, and the need then caused us to have to kind of rise to the occasion. And so I want to commend the church, first of all, for being willing to make those shifts, make those changes, and kind of get into it without falling too far. I think one of the challenges we're still facing right now is staying connected with a senior population that may not necessarily be as tech savvy. Now, some of our seniors have jumped on board, and they've learned Zoom. They have conquered Facebook and Facebook groups. They're doing a couple of TikToks now with their grandchildren. So, in that way, it was great. But I do think and fear that we have a large population of seniors that still have not been connected. And, Carl, we've been in this since March now. That's a long time to be without what you have engaged in worship and church for your last 50, 60 years.
All your life.
Yeah, so you've been coming to the church house every Sunday since you were born, and then all of a sudden it's stripped from you. And 8 months, it sounds short for some, but that's a long time to kind of dismantle people's spiritual core. Because it's not just you're not going to work out. It's not that you can't go to restaurants. Like, for many people, as it should be, your spiritual life is the core of everything else. And when you kind of take that off or take that away, it really shakes things up. And so we've been really trying to kind of conquer that challenge of connecting. We do some conference calls. We're doing some small groups. We had some drive-bys. We just kind of wave at people just to let them know that we still think about you. We dropped off some gifts, but I don't quite know yet, where we are. But that's probably our biggest challenge.
That is amazing. I'm going to tell you what's a trip about that. For the last couple of years, I've been praying and just thinking, and in a very tight group, been talking about, man, we got to do something other than church as usual.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was going to come to us like this, but I've been feeling for the past few years like there was something more than what most of the churches were doing. And I think that you just explained it when you said, you already were doing community service.
Right.
But when you look at this pandemic and what it did, I mean, people lost their jobs. If it were not for the bill that was passed, many people would have been evicted. So you're talking about a portion of your church that would have been homeless. Oh my God, what are senior pastors going to do with a third of their church that's homeless? So there's so many things that happen. And you're right, this is now church out of the box. And what I'm hoping is that when the time comes for us to get back to something called normal, because I don't believe normal will ever be what it was, but whenever we get back to something called normal, I'm hoping and I'm praying that all of the tremendous imagination and creativity that churches have used to reach the community, I'm hoping that we don't stop. And I'm wondering, from where you're sitting at St. Mark, do you see a way beyond this that you're not going to be so church as usual once we get a chance to come back?
Yeah, so I think so. I think some of the changes that have taken place, and let me just say this: change is not a bad word. I've often said with leadership and leadership trainings that different is different. Different isn't wrong. Different doesn't mean that what you did before was wrong. Different doesn't always mean that what you're doing now is better. Different can simply just be different. And so even in this conversation, when I say here's some changes I think we're going to make and probably keep, it doesn't at all dismiss what we did or what churches have done or what used to take place. I think for all of us, there's kind of the evolution of church. It's the evolution of God. I think God did it. The Bible I read and we love shows God kind of making some changes, and it doesn't dismiss what he was. It just kind of adds on to. We get God in the Old Testament. He shows up. He's cloud by day, fire by night. Then eventually he's like, hey, I'm gonna hang out, in the Ark of the Covenant, meet me in the tent of meeting. Then he says, nah, I don't want to be there anymore. Why don't you go ahead and create a whole tabernacle? So now they got to go beyond the veil. And then he's like, nah, I don't want to do that. wraps himself in flesh, comes down as Jesus, walks around for 33 years. He's okay, let me switch it up again. And now he dwells in us as the Holy Spirit. For me, that's
Amen.
kind of like the evolution of God. He's still God. He's still God of the Old Testament. He's still Jesus. He's still Spirit. But it's kind of, for me, it is kind of the perspective of we all change. And our church has done the same. I think our worship service will be different. We kind of looked at how long does worship have to be. And so instead of the 2.5 hours we used to sit in service, it's actually possible to have a whole powerful and impactful worship service in an hour or 30 minutes. I think there are advantages to both. The advantage to the 2.5 hour service is more people are involved. You get somebody that does the welcome, somebody does the prayer, somebody does call to worship. So more people are involved, which is a plus. So again, that's why it's not bad. But now that we know we can do it, in an hour with just a couple of people, we're gonna have to wrestle with, do we have to have 2.5 hour services? And I don't think it's either or. I think it's trying to figure out which one works. Because part of me personally, says, look, we give everybody else 2.5 hours. Movies are two hours, and you go to a basketball, football game, so don't cut God out and give him an hour.
That's right.
Part of me says, but if you can do it in an hour, then don't just make it long because that was tradition. And so again, I think what pandemic has done and COVID has done is, like you said, it's given us some creativity. Now we have options. Now we don't have to do it one way. We have options. So that's what I would beg. I would beg pastors and churches to really say, look, now I have more tools in my tool belt, right? Now we don't have to do a 2.5 hour service. Maybe this Sunday we'll do it in 30 minutes. I remember I had a chance to preach up north, the Northern Virginia area, for a worship service. And the pastor was saying, listen, we watching the Redskins fans around here. So this service is going to be short, and he just talked about how he had moved in from another state, but when he arrived there, he had to alter his service for his congregation because they weren't missing home games. And so he could have a 2 hour service, but when the Skins, when the Washington football team, when the football team was playing, he had to alter that service. I think COVID has not just given us change that we can keep and maintain, but I think it's given us creativity. And now with creativity, you can make, you can develop, you can, you can do iterations of something. I'm old school, so some of it I really love, but I'm a tech savvy computer science head, nerd. And so I'm loving the technology. And so I think, again, churches, ministries, if we can figure out a way to merge them, it works. And there are a number of things that we probably won't have to do. But just because we don't have to do them doesn't mean we won't. And just because we can do it doesn't mean, that we have to go for it. So I'm excited. I'm excited, and I'm interested, like you, to see what's going to happen.
Oh, yes. So as much success as you're probably having there, I do know, and maybe too, there's some churches that are really struggling. And there are some church members who are really struggling. Some pastors are having a really rough time with this transition, and some of their members are feeling left out, uncared for. What would be your advice for somebody who was coming into the St. Mark streaming service? They don't belong to St. Mark, but they're one of those persons who belong to a church that maybe haven't quite figured it out yet. And they feel lost and hurt and a little disillusioned. What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is be encouraged. Don't bail out. We love to have, more members, and we love to grow, but we don't want you to come because you just gruntle about some other place. I think what God has done for us is he has shown us the kingdom. And what you can do now is kind of take and pull a little bit from these other ministries that you see and bring them back to your worship centers. Bring them back to your church, bring them back to your paraministries and say, listen, here's something I saw. Now, you don't have to do it exact. You want to scale it to where your ministry is and how your ministry flows. And I think if people are kingdom minded, they'll share what technology were they using, how they come up with that concept. Show me the background, the nuts and bolts of how that worked. And I think you should maybe kind of see what's happening and bring it back home and make it work for you. I also think you want to always ask the question, why am I at my church? Am I at my church because of what it does for me? Or am I at my church because of what I can do for them? And if the question is the latter, what can I do for them? then you shop in these other ministries and get some word from these other ministries. I think what it does is it gives you, I want to say experience, but not really experience. It's where it gives you exposure, and exposure then allows you to expand on what you have. I think is where I start. And then let me say this: I think things happen in seasons. We were kind of talking a little bit before, before we came on. What's happening right now, whether we like it or love it or hate it, is God doing something that we haven't figured out yet.
That's
And
right.
I don't want to just say this is what I definitely know. There's some things I believe I'm hearing God say, and some things God is showing me. But I think outside of all of that, one thing God is doing is really just exposing everyone. Some people had never heard anyone preach outside of their pastor. They had never seen or experienced ministry outside of theirs. And whenever you live in your own little lake, you kind of miss out on what's out there. So now you get to say, you know what, we may be doing better than we thought. Or you get a more honest evaluation and say, you know what, maybe we weren't doing as good as we thought. Because when you compare yourself, you often compare yourself to what makes you good. And, I know for us, there's some things I've seen in some other live streams, some other worship services that challenged me to go back and say, wait, you know what? Maybe we weren't doing our call to discipleship, our decision making the best. We have to revamp that. Or maybe we weren't doing evangelism as great as I thought. And so I think it shows you where you are, and It really helps all of us kind of come to grips with what's possible.
I'm hoping that maybe some churches who had never thought about working together before this happened, just like what you just said, when you look at what others are doing and make you pick up the phone and call that pastor,
right?
Or maybe that worship leader, one of those ministry leaders, say, look, what in the world are y'all doing? And can somebody come over here and show me, so that we can come and get that oneness?
Yes.
No competition, but the spirit of oneness. Are you seeing that?
Absolutely. I'm hoping for it. I'm praying it. I haven't experienced it. There are many pastors that I know have kind of been in conversation, sharing ideas, and it's really practical. It's like, hey, what software are you using? What equipment did you buy? What tech services are you subscribing to? And a couple things have happened. One, we've seen unity in the body of Christ that we haven't seen before. And let me be honest, where there's something good, there's always something negative. So you do have some people who are going to be territorial and say, well, now I don't want to share it because, do you going to take the members, or, that happens. But that's really not the overarching message. I think the overarching message is pastors are connecting, they are assisting, they're collaborating on events, because now when you go live, like tonight, it's not just, who watches Carl, it's not just who watches Shawrod, it's all of our members and all of our connections coming into one place. And so I think one thing that's happened is unity has taken place. I think the other thing that's happened is, and I don't know if this is a segue, but I think there's been some economic empowerment, because now instead of one church or ministry purchasing or buying into an item or to a service or to a subscription, we've been able to say, listen, we got 20 churches. We all want to use your service. Go ahead and drop that price so we can get the group rate.
Right.
And so as a people kingdom, as a people, Black culture, we've really been able to kind of synergize and get more together than we could get by ourselves.
Right. So St. Mark also has a school.
Yes.
And we know that this back to school thing has been a hot topic. How are you handling that part in this COVID environment?
Yeah, so that's definitely a hot topic. I'll tell you what our challenge was, and is that our church is still closed for worship. But after much prayer, I'm talking about much prayer and conversations and counsel and advice, we have actually opened up our school. And so we average about 75 to 80 students in enrollment. We go up to fourth grade. This year, going into the school year, we polled the parents, and it was almost literally 50-50. 50% of the parents said, hey, I'm really not comfortable coming back. But then the other half said, hey, we want to come back. And if you guys can make it safe, of course, and still provide, high level academics, we want to come. And so we are open. One of the things that we obviously are doing are layers of social distancing and layers of COVID care. But then also, it really allowed parents who needed to go to work and needed to be away from home a safe place where their kids could come and still learn. I think the challenge with virtual and even being on site is that kids just are different. Like every child's not the same. Some children and students are going to thrive virtually. Some may not. And we found that, we have about 48 to 50 students now who are on site. And of course, this is the first week, and I'm going to say it's going well. Parents are happy. Teachers wanted to come back because the teachers wanted to be face to face. Now, the flip side of that is I think, virtual does keep children safe. And if nothing else, like the church, education had to figure out a way to evolve,
Yes.
I was telling people, I don't think that this was new. There were commercials and promos about K through 12th grade online education long before COVID. Nobody really took it seriously.
All right.
Matter of fact, I'm at the age group where I remember when colleges started offering degrees online and people thought they were a fluke. You can't get a master's degree online, or, you can't get a real legit degree online. But that changed, over the past years, and people embraced it. So, maybe again, what we're seeing is a shift that will stay, not just a shift that's for now. Who knows? We'll see.
That's right. Hey, I just want to remind the audience, hey, we're interactive here doing this live broadcast. So
Okay.
if you have a question or a comment, please post it in the feed. And as you can see, we're taking some of the comments and we'll put them up because we like to have an interactive audience. And listen, you never know when Dr. Riddick going to come back. And so if you got a question, you might want to ask it today. So I tell you what, Dr. Riddick, and this is something that makes me laugh. I was one of those guys who always kind of looked at germaphobes and like, here they go. But now every germaphobe I know, I'm telling them, y'all was right the whole time and we were crazy. And I'm sure you can see this now because the cleaning protocols, the disinfectant protocol that you got to go through for that school, it make you realize that either mama taught you real well.
Exactly.
Or you got to go back and teach mama.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we talk about creativity. Crisis breeds creativity.
Yes.
But some of the things that we've been asked to do, we laugh at. We probably should have been doing it all the time. Not wash your hands probably should have never been an option. We should have always been doing that. I don't know if it was ever safe, to be this close to people talking to them mouth to mouth. I don't know.
Right.
Again, I think God has a sense of humor. And for all of us, we're probably doing some things that we should have. I remember, my wife noticed it, but I remember when pandemic first happened, and I can't remember the countries, but they were showing images of the sky, and the sky was dark and it was cloudy. And once that particular country had gone into quarantine, and people had to stay in the house, they were not driving their cars, the trains had been shut down. They showed a picture of the same sky, and it was just beautifully clear. And she was the one who kind of commented. She said, we may have been polluting the earth the whole time, not knowing it, and God is just kind of doing some cleansing. So we laughed about it. But I think it might be true. I think, like you said, maybe we should have all have been a little more germophobic before this, and we just didn't realize it. So we'll see. And maybe it sticks a little bit later.
It's making us think outside of the box. And, that's one thing I learned during my military service. We have boundaries that we put on ourselves that are not really there. They're figments of our imagination.
That's
and
right.
For anybody who served in the United States Army, that your creativity, your imagination, and your resolve are challenged on a daily basis because not completing the mission is never an option, right? So whatever you have to do to get the mission done, you got to do that. And I'm seeing that now, not only with churches, but families. Tisha commented this morning, for those who don't know, Tisha's my wife. And for those of you who don't, Tisha is Dr. Riddick's first cousin. So,
yes, she is.
Yes. So she was commenting this morning. She said, look at, some of these posts that we see on social media. Parents and grandparents have become tremendously creative in how they make the home space look like a school space so that the children feel more like, there's a transition made when you come out of the room, come downstairs and go into whatever room has been dedicated for the educational process. And so it's bringing creativity out of everybody. And I love it. I absolutely love it.
Absolutely. Now, I've always said that that's probably one of God's greatest attributes that he passed on, creativity.
Yes.
I think that is, not to over spiritualize it, but that for me is probably a sign of God connection. Like God steps out of nothing and creates the earth. And then he tells us to be creative. And so this is it. And I don't know if we stretch to be creative if we don't have to. like you said, sometimes the mission has to almost seem impossible in order for us to be creative, or things have to change drastically. Sometimes there has to be something huge in order for us to think. And so, we're sitting in it now. Pandemic, racial injustice, churches shut down, school has changed. You're distant from family members and friends that you're used to seeing all the time. We had a group of friends we were going out with on Fridays, and the restaurants were closed.
Right.
And so we would either tailgate or pick up some from the house, and we would just drive to empty parking lots and just eat. It was a crazy thing. We got to do something, but we didn't know what to do. And so I think you're right. Creativity is the brand of the day.
I never had a healthy appreciation for the arts. I've heard the arguments for years, but always,
Right.
Because I can't draw a stick man. I'm
not straight.
I'm art dumb. Like yes, my stick man have curvature, right? But now that things, nothing is normal for me, in my mind and in my psyche, it has been the demonstration and the creativity of art, which has connected many dots for me, and never again will I overlook the artist or the artist in a person. It is a very, very needed gift.
Absolutely.
So if you don't mind, I want to spend a little time talking about the racial unrest. I also broadcast on another platform called Carlsconversations, and the motto there is a safe place to have very uncomfortable conversations. And so it's a little more risque on that side, right? And so I'll have conversations there that may not be so suitable for Heart for the Community initiative, but nevertheless, very much needed socially. There's so much going on, and I want to get your take on in this Black Lives Matter movement situation. And I want to be very clear. I didn't say Black Lives Matter organization. I said Black Lives Matter movement, or whatever you want to name the movement.
Right.
Do you believe that the church has a place in that movement? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. So my answer obviously is yes. The church has a place in the movement. A matter of fact, I would probably argue that there are no movements that the church should not be a part of, whether they're pro the movement or anti the movement. I think churches have to be involved. Churches are groups of people, and churches are God's representative, and God cares about everything that has to do with anything, that we're going through. So yes, I think the church definitely has a role. I think the church's role is one, awareness. I think the church has to make sure that both its people and the communities are aware of the facts, aware of what they can do in action items. I think the church's role is to make its voice known. Again, as a group of people, we are much louder, much more impactful, and much stronger together than we are individually. And so one person can say it, but when the church stands behind that same saying, it's a game changer. I think the church's role is to speak truth to power. One of the things that happens biblically is we get all of these kings. After Saul gets in place, we get king after king after king after king, but there was no king who was not also assigned a prophet, which is to say that every governmental power has to have some spiritual voice and spiritual conviction. And we are that. And so I think the church's role is to be able to speak truth to power. And I'm not sure people understand it. We say speak truth to power. For me, that simply means people who are in power sometimes abuse it and need truth spoken to them. And so the church's role is to kind of rise up and do it. I think Jesus' ministry was just that he definitely came to save souls, definitely came to heal. But in those last days, there was a government that said one thing that wasn't right, and approve some things that were not just, and Jesus, kind of fought against that. And so to follow Jesus is to also be vocal about social injustice, racism, some of the laws that get passed, no matter which party you're in. You still have to figure out what your God voice is. And so absolutely, I think the church is very instrumental in everything that's happening. Matter of fact, to be honest, I'm slightly disappointed in some cases that the church probably hasn't had a stronger role. That, for me right now, it's almost like there is a movement and the church kind of came along. Mm-hmm. But before that, it was the church leading the movement and others came along. I do think God uses whatever he needs to get it done. But I would personally love to see the church at large, kind of jump ahead and pull everybody along.
That's right. And I think what you said is so true. The church kind of came along. And I think that's why we see some of the negative things that we do see. But I'm very careful in using the word negative, because these youngsters are leading this movement.
Yeah.
And we can't really fault them if we didn't have a voice.
That's right.
And you said every king had a prophet. Well, that has not changed in the church. And I'm gonna try not to preach, but I think that we've gotten to a point where the church is following politics and politicians and picking sides in politics and with politicians, when the church ought to be leading and being that prophetic voice. People gonna vote the way they're gonna vote. Our job should be to preach Jesus Christ. Where are you in that argument?
Yeah, and again, I think it's the awareness. I don't know if so the problem for people who have power and platform, be it the church, be it politicians, be it athletes, is that there's always the risk of manipulating or persuading people a certain way when you have a majority. So I think, again, the church's role is to create awareness. And once you create awareness, then you allow God to kind of help point and lead people in a direction they should go. I think, one, it's illegal for pastors to get up and say, this is who you should vote for. And I think most of us know that. But even the innuendos, I think, really could be kind of curtailed and just say, listen, first of all, you need to go vote. Second of all, here's what's going on. And then people really are both wise enough, spiritually in tune enough to kind of make their own decisions. So I'm with you. I do think that we should have the conversations. I think the church should be able to shout out loud, here's some things that are happening. And I don't know that you have to do it with a slant. I think you can just do it. And then from there, people will make their own decisions. I remember, again, just kind of blessed with preaching opportunity in that DC area. Churches in that area can be really divided politically.
Oh, yes.
It could be an all Black church, but still be very divided politically. And, some of the conversations with those pastors, they say, listen, I know you hear, don't mention this, don't mention that. I said, wait a minute, man, you can't tell me, what to preach. But it makes sense, because for them, it was hey, look, we came here about Jesus. Now, Jesus definitely does have a place in politics. So we're not trying to decide the two. I don't, that whole separation of church and state, you shouldn't separate the church from anything. Not for me. The church has to be involved. But I do think the creating of awareness is where it all starts. Yeah,
that's right. I'm not sure exactly where you sit with it, but I know I was with that group of Black pastors, Black members who were really disappointed with some of our white churches, our white pastors, because it felt like we were being ignored, almost as if in 2020, with the history of this country as it is, this doesn't get you off of the bench to have a voice for justice and righteousness. And I'm going to tell you something that I discovered. Because I've been told this. Now, this is not what I heard. This is what I know.
Yeah.
That because of some of the views of the BLM organization, the white churches, who mostly that I have seen have been very conservative in their politics. Yeah. When it comes to the abortion issue and the LGBT issue, if there's anything that looks like support for that, they will not get involved. And so my thing was two things. Number one, I'm a activist in the BLM movement. Absolutely. I don't have anything to do with the organization. I don't know anybody in the organization, and we are not for a lot of the stuff that they're doing. Matter of fact, some of it I'm really not all that familiar with because I'm not a part of it. And so my thing has been, call it whatever you need to call it. If saying Black Lives Matter to your congregation is something that you just can't do, okay, call it whatever you want to call it, but recognize that there's a problem, and now come and do something in this movement so that we can work together. What have you seen in that?
Yeah, I have. I've seen the same. I've seen the same with And I'll say some because you do have some white pastors who are pro BLM. Then you have some who are on the fence but just won't make the jump. And then you have some that are against it. I think one of the things that has happened much more recently is a global movement to really rise up against racial injustice and Black lives, Black and brown lives. For me, the problem with it being global is that it has made it popular. And so now people have jumped on board because it's popular, not because it's a real true belief. I think this is true with some of our larger organizations, not to call names, but there were many organizations that a year ago wouldn't speak up, wouldn't sound off, they wouldn't make a move. And we were screaming Black Lives Matter. We were talking about injustice. We were kneeling at games, and they just never moved. When it became something that was popular, and now they saw that their larger base was now on board, they kind of made that shift. And so I think what we've seen with some churches, our white brothers and sisters, is a lot of inactivity because of what they may lose. What's at stake. I think also, and we've kind of talked about this in other settings, I think that there was literally a very unfortunate ignorance that a lot of white pastors really didn't see it. I think that the place of privilege in which they lived and operated in was so high that they were drowning in it so much that they didn't know. And I honestly, I don't know if that's more dangerous or less dangerous. Part of me says, I wish you had known and just ignored it. But now I'm finding out that you really didn't know. And so I think there's a shock and awe of, wait a minute, I can't believe this is really happening. I mean, we heard about it, but we didn't believe it. And then some of the more recent videos, particularly the George Floyd video, was something you just couldn't ignore. And then, of course, again, with more people jumping on board, I think some have jumped on because it's popular, not necessarily because it's still their belief. So I'm still on the fence. I don't think everyone who screams Black Lives Matter, wears a T-shirt, or shows up is still pro it as much as they are afraid to go against the grain.
We got some of that too. I've said this in a couple of different settings. From what I see, there are two different types of ignorance. The first is saying, just I think more like what you just said, we really didn't know. Right. And we know that we're late to the party. We admit that. Yeah. And we're trying to learn. So we're here and we're listening and we're trying to figure our way through this to figure out how we can jump on and help. Even as frustrating as that can be, because you're like, how in the world did you not know? Right. I'm glad to hear it because it's healthy. And I'm the first one to say, your starting point is your starting point. That's what it is. But at some point, you got to come to the party. But then there is another type of ignorance that's very unhealthy. And that is that willful ignorance. Absolutely. And then there are those who are, and ignorance just means that we don't know. They don't know, but they speak as one having authority. That's dangerous. It is. That's dangerous to have a loud, powerful, ignorant person. That's right. Because it's counterproductive. And so, there's a mixed bag. The deal is, and I don't want the audience to think that, I got the axe that I'm trying to, chop the church. No, I call it out because what I really want is reconciliation. A lot of people really didn't know that you have racism in the church. Yeah. And right. I'm hoping that this is one of the things that will help heal it. Are you seeing a possibility that maybe we can get some racial reconciliation through this process?
Yeah, I do. I think racial injustice has been generational. And I think racial reconciliation will have to be generational. God is able to do all things. He's a miracle worker. And I think, by the end of the year, could he wipe it away? Possibly. But honestly, I think it happens over time because what you just talked about, both the willful ignorance and the absolute ignorance, both of those were entrenched in people. It wasn't something that just happened yesterday. Like they are blind and or ignorant because of what they've been taught and how they have lived for years. It's not just what their parents did, but it's what their parents did, the grandparents did, great parents did. And so their culture can be, the racism becoming embedded in the culture. So I think it's a generational shift. I think this is a generation that is kind of shaking things up. I think in the years to come, more generations will build from this. I think as, my generation who didn't experience the civil rights movement, but used it as a image and model and an example of how to fight, racial injustices. Now, what we'll have is my children growing up remembering, the George Floyd and some of these other moments, remembering that statues were being tossed at. Like, they'll use that as their Martin Luther King moment, and Martin Luther King will be back. So I think every generation kind of gets us a step closer to what was. And if we hadn't had the one, we wouldn't have the now. If we didn't have the now, we won't have the next. So I think it's a generational progression. Looking forward to it, though. Definitely looking forward to it. Some change.
We got a few minutes left, but I want to get to this question. Dr. Riddick, Monica Lucille asked this question. How come pastors do not address social issues that go against God's word and speak or help the people who are suffering?
Yeah. And, Miss Monica, I think while this answer is probably not the one we want to hear, I think it starts off with knowing that the Bible, while absolutely God's word, has been translated so many ways. I often remind people that the Ku Klux Klan, that I believe is a 100% racist organization, whether that's true or not, that's how I have seen it and learned it. They actually use the Bible as framework for their core beliefs. And so I think there's some pastors who don't preach it because they really just don't see it. I think also that pastors have different passions and different calls. There are some pastors and there are some churches that are 100% absolutely unapologetically Black and then Christian. And then there are others that may focus on other areas of the Bible. And so I'm not trying to give anybody an excuse or a green light not to, preach social justice, not to highlight it in the Bible. But again, in ignorance, sometimes people don't see what they are looking for. I think now, even some pastors who are probably preaching a little more social justice may not have done it had this not been the climate. But with this being the climate, it now raises awareness and God revelation on something because they're looking for it. If you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. And again, if you don't know it exists, you're not looking for it. And even in Black churches, if it's not something of your concern, because one of the things we haven't talked about, maybe we shouldn't, is that there's also a strong level of classism that exists within racism. And that classism can often separate people from seeing that racism. And so I think that there is a lot of fringe burden and benefits to preaching social justice, and all pastors really just haven't embraced that. I do believe, Bishop, that God is against racism. I think God is against injustice. I think that God abhors anything that is not fair, while at the same time, there's always been injustice, always been some racism, always been this lack of equality. And God has used his people, whether groups, churches, or individuals, to kind of bring reconciliation. It's generational. I think we got to keep working on it.
That's right. Yeah. And Pastor Monica Gary, she said many pastors don't address injustice because it is tied to the hierarchy of capitalism, and they benefit from those things. And Pastor Monica, whether you know it or not, Dr. Riddick and I had a little convo about that right before we came on air.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I wish we had some more time tonight.
Right.
But right. It's so much going on with that. And my heart goes out to those pastors, not to pacify them, but they're in a difficult situation when you pastor a congregation that's really not ready for that conversation. Yeah. But here it is, you're hearing from God and you know what needs to be done, but you're pastoring a stiff-necked people who are not ready. Yeah. And that's a shame. But I think that the word Christian and racism in the same sentence, it just don't make sense to me.
Right. It doesn't. But again, I mean, we talking not preaching, but we're talking like days of Moses, right? Moses brings home a dark-skinned wife and the people are like, look, she got to go.
Right.
Now, some would say it's just because she was in another country. But if you're racially sensitive and you see it for what it is, it was, no, she's of a different race.
That's right.
So again, I think it's always kind of been around. And I think I'm with you that we have to challenge the church. We have to challenge pastors. I myself have been challenged to become much more social justice in preaching when it really wasn't something that was my core, right? Social justice aware, but it wasn't always in the message, with it being one in need and it being a concern and it being pushed in the forefront. You have to talk about it. You can't ignore it. because one, people are dealing with it. And if people are dealing with it, then we want to make sure that we address how God sees it. But then the other part, for me is I want to applaud the pastors who are speaking loud and standing strong and not bending to that capitalist hierarchy that they could benefit from. I want to, really kind of shout out all of the churches, both Black pastors and white pastors who are going after it and saying, listen, this is not going to happen on my block, my neighborhood. Big kudos to you guys. And you are an example, because if no one does it, then we don't even know how to do it. And so I think it's a good mix of each. We challenge those who are not, we applaud those who are, and somewhere in the middle, we hope we get some more people to come on the side of let's get active.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, audience. I'm so sorry that we got to wrap, but there are many things going on. We are absolutely thankful that Dr. Riddick has shared with us.
Yeah.
And listen, for all of you who were getting so involved in this conversation, now I may not be able to convince Dr. Riddick to come back all by myself, but if you start bombarding those comments and say bring him back, maybe he'll be influenced to say yes to part 2 of this interview. So listen, I want to remind you now, this Saturday, the 12th of September, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. at Cecil Garrison Park in Dumfries, Virginia. We're going to go early bird to the polls, voter registration, voter education, census information. We're going to have several state and local politicians who will be speaking to us. The spotlight will be on Qasim Rashid, who is running for the 1st congressional district here in Virginia. And so also comedian Peter Ray Red will be there. He's going to be on stage at about 2:15 p.m. So listen, we want you to be there. And listen, this is being brought to you by 2 Mics Up, United Black Council, Star Bethlehem Missionary Baptist Church, PW Perspective, Heart for the Community Initiative, and Enough. All right. Also, we're going to support United Faith Christian Ministries. Our bishop out there, we just interviewed him, I think it was a week and a half ago. He's having an event at his church in Stafford from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. They having Pentecost in the parking lot, and we're trying to figure out a way to support that also. But we want you to know that you can do 2 events in one day, 11 to 4 with us in Dumfries, and then 4 to 7 down there in Stafford with United Faith Christian Ministry. All right, with Bishop Leonard Lacey. And we want you to be involved in that. Free to the community. It won't cost you a dime. Come on out and get some of this good stuff that we have for you. Dr. Riddick, thank you so much. Is there anything that you wanted to say to the audience before you leave? No, I want to thank you again so much for allowing me to come and be a part of this. Nicole, we're doing this prayer campaign. I didn't know if I was able just to kind of share. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Listen, we are bombarding heaven with prayer. And just quickly, if you check out prayerunplugged.org, we are believing God for 100,000 hours of prayer. We're trying to get 5,000 people, 112 churches, 12 countries, and 24 states represented in prayer for just this month. And so, if you guys are interested, come and check it out. You can register and say, hey, I'm going to pray. I'm pledging this many hours. We're going to do a 24-hour prayer event because, everything that you guys are doing, we want to just kind of undergird that. We believe in. Make sure you go out to vote. And again, Carl, thank you so much, man, for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I hope it blessed somebody. And again, anytime you call, man, I'm here to come back, always. Amen. And if you didn't see those comments, it is overwhelmingly approved that they want you to come back. Hey, listen, Spirit of Truth, I'm going to be there at Bible study at 7. Don't worry. Give me a few minutes to get myself squared away. I'm doing the same thing. and I'll be there. So God bless you, audience. And like I always tell you, until next time, may God bless you. May heaven smile upon you. You have a good evening. Until next time. Bye-bye.